From Chicago studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Samana Siddiqui. First, the headlines. 155 protesters arrested outside the White House. Londoners protest colonialism and Columbus Day. 5 Indian soldiers among 7 killed in occupied Kashmir. Man inspired by Norway's Nazi terrorists threatened to bomb Islamic center. Islamic Fintech is rising. Our top story tonight. Hundreds of Native Americans and environmental advocates continued to rally yesterday outside the White House. This was for the second day in observance of Indigenous Peoples Day. At least 155 protesters were arrested Tuesday as part of the week-long action pressuring President Joe Biden to declare a climate emergency and end fossil fuel projects. Protesters carried banners and chanted slogans demanding justice. In the first such proclamation, President Biden last week declared the U.S. will observe Indigenous Peoples Day on the same day as Columbus Day. Some states already observe days to honor Native Americans. Protesters gathered Tuesday at London's Trafalgar Square to protest colonialism and Columbus Day. That observance commemorates Christopher Columbus's landing in the Americas in 1492. Protesters rejected the description of Columbus as an explorer and said he was responsible for genocide. Columbus is generally believed to have brought violence and harm to the Americas. Critics also say his arrival marked the beginning of the displacement and genocide of indigenous people. Earlier on Tuesday, a statue of Columbus in Belgrave Square Gardens was spray-painted red. This was to symbolize blood and the deaths of indigenous peoples in the Americas. Officials from India's army say that Kashmiri militants shot 5 soldiers in Indian-administered Kashmir on Monday. Separately, 2 suspected rebels were shot dead in different incidents, authorities said. The shootings were the deadliest attack on Indian military forces in 6 months. For more than 3 decades, rebel groups have been fighting Indian soldiers, demanding Kashmir's independence or merger with Pakistan. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Hindu nationalist government angered many Kashmiris in 2019. That was when it scrapped the Muslim-majority region's semi-autonomous status. Tensions have flared in recent weeks with a spate of shootings of civilians in the area. 7 people were killed last week in attacks claimed by an anti-India militant group. The house of one of the suspected rebels killed by the army was also demolished by the Indian military. An Indian government source told AFP that about 650 Kashmiris have been arrested. Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump joined Israeli leaders at a reception Monday for the launch of the Friedman Center. The event was held in the Museum of Tolerance, a controversial building erected in Jerusalem over parts of the historic Ma'aman Allah Muslim Cemetery. Palestinian Grand Mufti Mohammed Hussein said the centuries-old Palestinian burial site is an Islamic endowment called a waqf in Arabic. The event was also attended by former Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as well as Mike Pompeo and Steve Mnuchin, both officials in the administration of former U.S. President Donald Trump. The center is named after David Friedman, a former U.S. ambassador to Israel. Its mission is to bring Muslim tourists to Jerusalem, Friedman said. A UK man inspired by Norwegian terrorist Anders Breivik said he threatened to bomb a Leicester Islamic center last June to purify Britain. Kyle Howe told police he was going to set off a car bomb outside the Muslim Community Center. He called 999 and said he would pack up to 4 kilograms of explosives into the boot of his car and target the center when many people were nearby. Howe told the call handler he had been observing the center and would set off the explosion at 8:43 in the morning to kill as many people as possible. He said he planned to target 2 other buildings in the city, but did not say where. Howe called Breivik his commander, describing his 2011 terror attacks as self-defense. Prosecutor Paul Pryor told the court he stated he wanted to hurt people as Europe needed to be purified as multiculturalism was causing crime. Howe has been sentenced to prison for 2 years and 4 months after admitting to making a bomb hoax. The UN's top court awards Somalia control of a potential oil and gas-rich chunk of the Indian Ocean on Tuesday. This was after a bitter legal battle with neighboring Kenya over a sea border. The International Court of Justice ruled there was no agreed maritime boundary and drew a new border close to the one claimed by Somalia. Chief Judge Joan Donoghue said Kenya kept a part of the 38,000 square mile area. The nation had claimed the entire area off the East African coast, but said last week it would refuse to recognize the jurisdiction of the Hague-based court. The court's decision is final and could have far-reaching consequences for the future relations between the 2 countries. Somalia took Kenya to court in 2014 over the disputed patch of sea. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro was accused of crimes against humanity at the International Criminal Court Tuesday. This was for his alleged role in the destruction of the Amazon. It is the first case seeking to explicitly link deforestation to loss of life. Austrian environmental justice group All Rise filed the complaint in the Hague-based court on Tuesday. The group sought legal proceedings against Bolsonaro and his administration for actions directly linked to the negative impacts of climate change. The complaint accuses the Brazilian leader of causing the murder of environmental defenders and endangering the global population through emissions caused by deforestation. Greenhouse gas emissions from burning and industrial-scale agriculture in the Amazon are higher than the total annual emissions of Italy or Spain. Deforestation in the region already releases more carbon dioxide than the rest of the Amazon can absorb. Bolsonaro's office did not respond to a request for comment from AFP. Islamic Fintech has become the fastest-growing segment of financial technology among the countries of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, or OIC. According to one report, it accounted for $49 billion in transaction volumes in 2020. The Global Islamic Fintech Report projects the volume of transactions within the Islamic fintech sector of these nations to grow at a compound annual growth rate of 21%, or $128 billion. The application of fintech ensures access to Sharia-compliant products and services. Companies also use technology to address issues relevant to Muslims, which require adherence to Sharia principles. G20 leaders pledged humanitarian aid to Afghanistan after a virtual summit on Tuesday. The European Union pledged €1 billion at the opening of the meeting.
Ich will ausdrücklich begrüßen, dass die Europäische Union in Form der Kommissionspräsidentin heute noch mal zusätzliche 1 Milliarde Euro zur Verfügung gestellt hat für all diese Aufgaben, die im Zusammenhang mit Afghanistan.
U.S. State Department spokesman Ned Price said the first face-to-face talks between senior Taliban and U.S. officials in Doha since U.S. withdrawal were candid and largely positive. He said the Taliban will ultimately be judged not only on its words, but solely on its actions. Southwest Airlines and American Airlines will require employees to get vaccinated despite an edict by Texas Governor Greg Abbott that bans vaccine mandates for private businesses. Southwest said in a statement it would be expected to comply with the Biden administration's requirement that government contractors be vaccinated by December 8th. In related news, protesters carried mock coffins in London to urge the government to drop vaccine patents. The group Global Justice Now carried the coffins from Westminster to Downing Street in central London, protesting the UK blocking a waiver for the patent of the COVID-19 vaccine. They wore black to symbolize mourning, holding banners that said, "Drop the patents, vaccinate the world." A Monday night fire at the Islamic Center of Tacoma in the state of Washington is under investigation as suspected arson. Though there were people inside the building when the fire started, they managed to escape. The Pierce County Sheriff's Department is investigating the possible arson. West Pierce Fire and Rescue responded just after 8 p.m. to the center. The fire had engulfed the roof and attic area. Crews were able to put the fire out quickly, but there was fire, smoke, and water damage to the interior and exterior of the Islamic Center. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
I am what hunger looks like in America. I am an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for the last day of school. Because this may be the last time I'll have lunch. Till September.
I am a single father of 2 who works 3 part-time jobs, and that's still not enough to put food on the table.
I was created by artificial intelligence from faces of the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger.
Feeding America, 200 food banks strong.
Welcome back. Will aiding NGOs that bypass the Taliban help? To discuss the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, let's go to Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Thank you, Samana. The interesting conversation about Afghanistan is taking place. After America left, occupation ended, but a Cold War began, sort of, that they froze $9 billion of Afghan money. And then IMF and World Bank follow the suit. They're not going to issue their funds either. But now the United Nations is asking for dialogue, consent for people there, and they got pledged of $1.2 billion US. And yesterday, European Union came forward and they matched the money by another $1.2 billion. That's all good. But here's the catch. They said the money will be given through NGOs in Afghanistan. So NGOs are going to be now handling $2.4 billion. Are NGOs that powerful? Is their reach is so much that they can bypass a government? To discuss with us is someone who has dedicated 25 years of his life studying Afghanistan. And that is our guest, Professor Abdul Qadir Sinno. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Professor Sinno is Associate Professor at Indiana University, Bloomington, and he's author of many books and articles on this topic of Afghanistan. So tell us why the West has such a high level of confidence on Afghan NGOs while they have been in discussion and dialogue for last 9-8 years with Taliban.
Well, the West is interested in not giving the money to the Taliban. In fact, the West has specific concerns in Afghanistan. For Western Europe, they want to reduce the flow of Afghan refugees. Now, Afghan refugees make the largest national group trying to enter Europe as opposed to Syrians and Iraqis in the past. And so the Europeans have donated $1.2 billion, the EU has donated $1.2 billion in the hope that this aid will keep Afghans home so they won't try to make their way to Europe. As for the United States, their concern is to maintain, to keep the economic situation of Afghanistan from collapsing, which will create a whole host of problems and help the so-called Islamic State grow in Afghanistan. And that's the main concern of the United States. But both the EU and the United States don't want to recognize the Taliban yet, don't want to give it legitimacy, and therefore don't want the money to be channeled through them. Even though, like you mentioned, they have been negotiating with the Taliban for years, and there's a treaty between the United States and the Taliban signed under the Trump administration in which the United States commits to having positive relations with the Taliban and to rebuild Afghanistan after it withdraws. That's in the treaty.
Oh, so there is a treaty which commits United States to rebuild Afghanistan?
That's correct. It's a 5-page treaty signed between the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, most known as the Taliban, and the United States government under the Trump administration. And President Biden has never negated that treaty. In fact, he has abided by a portion of it, which included withdrawing troops from Afghanistan, even though the withdrawal took place later than agreed to in the treaty by a few months.
No wonder that Taliban in Doha this weekend demanded that agreement be implemented. But tell me this: why then, if there is an agreement in place and there is a dialogue going on, why in the world aid which is $2.4 billion, which is already committed and raised. Whatever goals Europeans and America has may be different. Why that will go through NGOs? Are NGOs very powerful in Afghanistan?
Well, I mean, NGOs are meaningful in Afghanistan, but they're not powerful by any means. NGOs don't have militaries or what have you. And that's not, I don't think that's the crux of the question. It's just that they want to sideline the Taliban. They want to get aid to the public so they can achieve their policy goals without necessarily having that aid go to the Taliban. So domestically, at least, they will not be accused of supporting the Taliban, who in fact won that conflict in Afghanistan, with the United States leaving after 20 years without achieving any of its gains and having its client regime basically dismantled by the Taliban. And so it's, in a sense, it's wishful thinking. And the Taliban, however, have committed to let NGOs function in Afghanistan because they understand that this is one way to get aid money to a desperate Afghan population. You see, in the last 20 years, the economy of Afghanistan relied on two things. One was the narcotics economy, the production of drugs, the export of drugs. And second was Western aid that was sent to Afghanistan to support the US-led coalition's war effort and building that state that it wanted to establish in Kabul, which just collapsed, right? And so now that that flow of money that came from the West has stopped, and that's about half of the economy of Afghanistan, if not more, then the Taliban know they're headed towards an economic collapse. The country is headed towards an economic collapse. And so they also have every interest to avert an economic collapse for the sake of their own population. So because they are the stewards of Afghanistan right now, they are the ones in charge of government. And so they're willing to compromise. However, the United States is also, and Europe are asking them to make other concessions, including, giving women access to education, employment, as well as have women workers work for the NGOs that would disperse the aid they're giving.
So I will stay on the NGO question in a little while, if you help me there. Do NGOs in Afghanistan, now you're saying that the Taliban are okay with that, and European Union and America wants to use NGOs. Do NGOs have processes and systems in place to take care of 40 million people who are in dire need of help right now?
Of course not. And also, the NGOs that operated in Afghanistan when the US-led coalition was occupying the country or had a strong presence in the country were mostly foreign. There are Afghan NGOs, but mostly those were foreign direct NGOs with Afghan employees and foreign employees. And so Afghan NGOs on their own are not significant.
So it means the United Nations and NGOs and different entities will take $2.4 billion, and good part of it will go in the salaries of the foreigners who will be going there again.
That's quite possible, yes.
So what would you suggest need to be done now when people are in dire needs? I mean, I was looking at a video, a woman, extremely weak woman in Kabul, was sitting on a street and trying to sell her household things, including two slippers of a child, their girl. And she says it was very difficult to convince her to let her only shoes go. Those are slippers, the plastic based. But she convinced her by saying that, if I can sell this, I can bring some food for you. In that dire situation, what is the best model to help Afghan people at this moment?
This is a great question. Afghanistan is going through a dire situation, as you mentioned. The Westerners, including politicians, have to understand that the GDP per capita in Afghanistan is less than $500 a year right now. And with the economic collapse, it'll probably go down to about half of that in a couple of years. The West has to forget politics. Afghanistan is a desperate situation, and you have a population on the brink of famine and despair. Whatever those goals are, it's time to forget. The West occupied Afghanistan for 20 years, tried to shape it the way it wants. It won't shape it now through sanctions and playing hardball. The Taliban not only did win this conflict, but they did also have a treaty with the United States, which was leading the international coalition in Afghanistan. And in it, the United States agreed to have positive relations with the Taliban. It's time to just treat the Taliban as a government, forget the past, turn a new page, and donate money to those who are able to implement those programs. The West can make demands about women's participation, what have you, and I mean, those are demands that I'm sympathetic to, but this is not the time for it right now. Afghanistan needs to heal. Afghans need to be safe in their persons and be healthy and have food on the table to eat. Now is the time to restabilize Afghanistan, allow it a period of peace under any government, it doesn't matter which, to provide it with enough aid to stand back on its feet, to have a balanced economy, not based on foreign aid, from which everybody benefits. So they can become a normal society again that transcends the trauma of the war, a war that has not stopped since 1979. When Afghanistan stabilizes after a few years, then they can start making claims. In fact, Afghan society will probably evolve on its own over time to allow more inclusivity for all segments of the population. So in that case, are you recommending that United States is better off unfreezing those $9 billion of Afghan money and deal with Taliban directly instead of trying to create a parallel state of NGOs? Those $9 billion are Afghan money. They rightfully belong to the government of Afghanistan. And the Taliban are now the government of Afghanistan, uncontested pretty much domestically. This has to be respected. And as per that treaty, the United States signed with the Taliban, they have to respect that. And really, aid, if any, has to be given unconditionally. There was a very good article yesterday, perhaps in the New York Times, by a Norwegian aid official who argued aid has to be given unconditionally. Now it's not the time to make claims on an impoverished population and those who govern them. It's just not the time for it. It will completely sabotage the whole aid effort. Professor Abdul Qadir Sinno, we are talking, who's a specialist on Afghanistan, have studied it for 25 years. I wrote an article in 2009 in Huffington Post asking why do Afghans have a life expectancy of only 44 years. And that 44 years at that time was a CIA figure. And recently, to revise the article, I looked up and I felt very good because they were saying it's 70 or so life expectancy. But reading your article, which you refer to New York Times, I learned it is still 44-year life expectancy, which is, sort of 20, 30 years lower than all the neighboring countries who eat the same type of bread as they do, and not much richer than Afghanistan in terms of poor people. So life expectancy has not increased. So one reason, one I understand, is that casualties of war. There's a tremendous amount of war for 40 years, which has been keeping it low. But what are the other variables that life expectancy has remained so low? 44 was 12 years ago, and now it's still, New York Times is saying, according to health professionals, it is 48 only. Why Afghans live so low? That's a really good question. First, the reason we have numbers that are not credible is because during the United States, and there's a New York Times written on this, the US government has been giving false numbers on Afghanistan to show progress over the years. It is an article in the New York Times from 2018 that details how this has been done, including on the advancement of women's education and employment, etc., and longevity as well as children's. Now, let me give you several reasons why Afghans don't live so long. First, medical care is so bad that 1 out of 5 children in Afghanistan is dying before the age of 5. Malnutrition is so bad that it also affects their development and their ability to survive. Afghan women have a very high likelihood of dying each time they give birth. Those are at the beginning of life. already death looms in Afghanistan. Of course, on top of that, you have the casualties of war. You have, which are completely underestimated too, with the numbers that we have from the United Nations and from other sources are floors for those numbers and not ceilings. The reason is because many in Afghanistan bury their killed quickly, and there's no one to keep count of those civilians killed. And so we don't know exactly how many died. Most likely it is about at least 150,000 civilians that have died, at least in the conflict, and most likely more. Another issue is drug consumption. Until 15 years ago, hardly any Afghans consumed the drugs that were produced in Afghanistan. Now, drug consumption in Afghanistan, especially around Kabul, is endemic. And it's estimated that hundreds of thousands of Afghans are heroin addicts. And so all those factors add up, and the consequence of it is that life expectancy in Afghanistan is very low. Whether it's exactly 48 or low 50s, it's not clear because it's very hard to have accurate statistics in Afghanistan, but it's very, very low, unfortunately.
So situation for NGOs to work, it's not only the food distribution, but healthcare. It seems that more you talk, more I come to realize that your recipe that America and Western Europe forget the politics, try to save life by strengthening the government instead of undermining the government through NGOs. That seems to be the wiser thing to do. But do you think America is wise enough to make that type of decision right now?
Well, the people who need to be wise are the administration, of course, the Biden administration. And they're probably concerned about domestic matters too, because even though Trump already had negotiated with the Taliban and had a treaty with them, an agreement with them, Democrats are particularly vulnerable when it comes to international relations, of appearing or of being called weak in international relations. And so if they begin to give money and aid to a Taliban government that comes from the Taliban who defeated the United States in that conflict, in the sense that outlasted the United States in Afghanistan in asymmetric warfare, they may end up being called, come election time, they end up being called weak by Republican candidates. And so probably the Biden administration is concerned about that issue. They want to appear to be weak, especially when election time comes. Also, they feel and they think that this is how they can keep leverage over the Taliban, and so the Taliban will never allow Al-Qaeda to re-enter Afghanistan, re-establish itself in Afghanistan, and so they can get the Taliban to defeat the Islamic State, which the so-called Islamic State in Afghanistan, ISK, which they would do anyway because ISK is an opponent of the Taliban.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Sinno, for your time. Truly appreciate your insight about NGOs, and time is to pay attention to people's life, not politics. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Back to you, Samana.
Thank you, Imam Mujahid. That's all from our Chicago studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Salam and good night.